Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. It is a beautiful spring day in Providence, Rhode Island, but we're headed down to the University of Virginia. We've got Jennifer Lawless. She's the chair of the political science department down at UVA. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, it's beautiful here too, finally.
One-upping us down at UVA. Let's head over to New York. David Pecker is back up on the stand, his third day of testimony in the Trump trial in the Manhattan court. Talk a little bit about what we're expect to learn today, and then what potentially the impact of that into a more macro political sphere.
The whole point of David Pecker's testimony is to link Donald Trump specifically to the paperwork mistakes that the defense is claiming he had nothing to do with. And so what David Pecker has been able to do, and what he's continuing to do, is highlight very specific examples where Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, and David Pecker together discussed catching stories that were negative about Donald Trump and killing them, and publishing stories that were negative about Donald Trump's opponents. And what he's been able to show is not only that Donald Trump knew very well that that was what the National Enquirer was doing, but that Donald Trump was actually also signing off on specific checks associated with invoices regarding this catch and kill scheme. And so even if you don't like David Pecker, even if you think that Michael Cohen ultimately, when he gets on the stand, is going to be a liar, what David Pecker is doing is setting up the landscape, the general scaffolding for Donald Trump's crimes. And he's quite calm. He does not want to be there. It doesn't look like Donald Trump hates him or is directing venom toward him. And as a result, he's a pretty compelling witness.
Yeah, that's been the analysis across the board, regardless of the political affiliation, that he's credible, he's likable to the jury, and thus could be, in the long term of this trial, very damaging to Donald Trump.
Well, part of the reason that he's so damaging to Donald Trump is because, but for David Pecker, it would be a he said between Michael Cohen and Donald Trump regarding what Donald Trump knew about the payments that Michael Cohen was making. David Pecker, who was in the room, is saying, no, the three of us actually had these conversations. Donald Trump told us to do this, and he knew we were. And my understanding is that today there will be either audio or, printed confirmation of those.
Got it. What's the impact of it to sort of the grander political scheme?
Look, people care not very much about this trial. The most recent polling data suggests that, if anything, it's moved Republicans more in the direction of Donald Trump. But I do think every single day that Donald Trump is in the courtroom, and every single day that his indiscretions regarding 2016 are at the forefront, independent voters are more turned off. And Joe Biden just needs to do as well with independents in swing districts and swing states as he did in 2020 to get reelected. And he's out there on the campaign trail. He's in Pennsylvania, he's in Wisconsin, he's in Michigan, he's in Florida, while Donald Trump is sitting listening to David Pecker. And so even if the trial isn't going to move Republicans, it's keeping him off the campaign trail, and it is moving independents.
Let's move across New York City. Yesterday, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was at Columbia and gave remarks. He stood there with a group of other Republican House members, many from New York as well, and talked about what's going on college campuses, labeled it anti-Semitic, and called for the president of Columbia to resign. Your thoughts of that strategy, both from a standpoint of speaking out about what's going on college campuses, as well as in the grander scheme of the political dialogue and how Republicans are rallying to support Israel and Jews?
Well, first, I should just note, as somebody who's in higher education, I think that we're getting to a point where it's very unsettling that members of Congress are either hauling presidents into congressional hearings or now going to campuses themselves and calling for the resignations of presidents of private institutions because they generally don't like what they're seeing. Now, this is linked, obviously, to, chaos on college campuses. Columbia, for example, moved to hybrid learning for the last couple of days of the semester. Students are unsettled by this. But this has been something that Republicans and conservatives have been trying to do for well over a decade. And now they finally have the lightning rod that's allowing them to do it. So I just think that putting it into that broader perspective is important. In terms of what we're actually seeing right now, it's there doesn't seem to be any lesson learned yet. And across the country, whether we're talking about Columbia or USC or we saw at UT Austin yesterday, students are protesting. There are Jewish students having seders as in parts of these pro-Palestinian embankment camps. And so, I just think that college students are not being given the tools and the information that they need to fully understand the conflict. They're also not being given the protections that they would expect on a college campus to protest peacefully. There's obviously a line that they shouldn't be allowed to cross when it comes either to hate speech or threatening other students. But many of the students that are out there protesting are not actually engaging in that. And I think the media have conflated all of those dynamics.
At Brown University on Tuesday, the provost sent out a message that if you go and create an encampment, you're going to be prosecuted. On Wednesday, students created an encampment. On this morning, or sort of overnight, we got a copy of an email from the rabbi at the Hillel House, Josh Bolton, who said, listen, it's not, we're taking every step possible to keep Jewish students safe. We don't want you to leave campus, but this encampment is anti-Israel. Your thoughts on that, in which Jewish students feel, in some cases, at a minimum, that it's anti-Israel, and in other cases, that it's straight out anti-Semitism going on these campuses, or at least by subgroups within the groups that are protesting?
Well, I think the most charitable interpretation of the anti-Israel line is that it's anti-Netanyahu government. And I think it's true. It's not only that college students, but Americans in general, and frankly, Israelis, are opposed to the Netanyahu government and the manner in which he's been handling the war over the course of the last 6 months. Now, that's very different from saying that you don't support the state of Israel and a place for Jewish people to live. And that comes far closer to, explicit anti-Semitism targeted at specific Jewish students on a campus than saying that you don't support Netanyahu. And so, again, I think there are all of these layers. I don't think people are being careful about the language they're using, which we wouldn't expect them to be. When people are animated and mobilized about an issue, they're not careful about the language that they're using, but there are consequences to that. And suggesting that being anti-Israel is a completely different thing than being anti-Semitic is a hard pill to swallow.
There's a number of people who have commented on social media that say, well, listen, this is like the late 1960s, early 1970s, in which people protested on campuses against the Vietnam War, civil rights, women's rights, etc. You do have to go to the 72 election, which was the height of the anti-war protest on college campuses. Wasn't the 68 election the height of the protest? We're at the 72, and Americans overwhelmingly went for Richard Nixon against George McGovern. It was not a close election. It was a sweeping election. Could these protests really, for most people trying to live their day, getting bad economic news today on the growth, inflation still nagging, really tip them over to say, listen, I'm done with these Democrats. I'm going with somebody who's more law and order. And Republicans still, rightfully or wrongfully, kind of own the law and order brand.
Well, first, I wouldn't characterize today's news as bad economic news. 1.6% growth is not anything to sneeze at. It's less than what we had last year at this time. But as the economy continues to grow, there's less room for it to continue to grow.
Let me just say, the stock market's down 700 points. So Wall Street thinks it's pretty bad news.
Wall Street's wrong. You can quote me on that. Yeah, look, the Republicans do have an edge on law and order, but I would say that there's a little bit of a difference between what people are seeing on college campuses and what they're seeing in their actual communities. And I think that spillover is what becomes relevant. It also matters how the Democrats handle it. And, there have been times where, and you can think back to the 2020 and George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, where it seemed like there was going to be this juxtaposition between racial justice and law and order. But the law and order concerns were pretty, they were pretty relegated to specific areas, cities, and places. And they were not places where Republicans were ultimately going to have much power to sway the election anyway. So, it's unclear. The Republicans do have an edge on that, but what are they going to do? There's also something fundamentally unsettling about rounding up and arresting college students who are peacefully protesting. The footage from USC yesterday, for example, where the protest organizers said, look, if they want to arrest you, go peacefully and just walk out with them and get arrested. That sort of flies in the face of the idea that these are college students who are refusing to comply with a law and order framework. So the protesters have, I think, a lot of discretion in terms of how they want to present themselves and the cause, and the way that they do that and the way that the police respond will shape public opinion.
Our college presidents, in the case of Brown as an example, they say don't set up an encampment. They set up an encampment. I guess they've sent them disciplinary emails, but don't cross this line. Okay, wait a minute. Don't cross this line. Wait a minute. That there's not these places are for higher learning, but there's also an expectation of adult behavior on both sides, both by the administration and the students. If you say you can't do something, it's in violation of our law as a community, as a college, and then that group does it, doesn't it seem ineffective to continually sort of let those folks off the hook? In the case of Brown earlier in the year, they said if you protest and take over this building, we're going to arrest you and prosecute you. They had Providence police arrest them, and then they dropped the charges on 21 students. So aren't these college presidents kind of getting in a little over their head as to what they're actually good at, fundraising, and less good at, which is managing a crisis?
Well, they should be good at managing a crisis. The fact that they are not good at managing a crisis is what's allowing people, I think, to call for their ousting, right?
Right.
And that's part of the problem. I mean, I would say a couple of things. The first is, don't lay down an ultimatum if you're not going to follow through on that ultimatum. It's just silly. People don't do it with their 3-year-olds. Certainly don't do it with several thousand students on a college campus. If you don't plan on arresting them for setting up the encampment, don't tell them you're going to arrest them to set up the encampment. You can encourage them not to do so. You can explain why this flies in the face of Brown's values, et cetera. But I do think that you need to be a little bit more careful. Now, I also think that these college presidents are responding to what they saw happen to the presidents of MIT, Harvard, and Penn earlier in the year when they were grilled by these congressional committees. And as a result, they're trying to be more proactive. But again, being proactive doesn't necessarily work if you're going to then back down. So I don't envy the position any of them are in. I'm not sure there's a good solution to any of this, but there's no question that we're basically compiling now a laundry list of what not to do.
Are they just trying to play out the season? In other words, get through the semester with as little damage as possible and can't wait for exams and students to leave campus?
That's certainly part of it. The timing is to their advantage in that they then have a few months to figure out what their policies are going to be and to communicate those policies. Frankly, it also gives them a little bit of time to let the politics of this play out and to see where the United States is and what the Biden administration does in dealing with Netanyahu and in continuing to deal with and help navigate the Israel-Gaza crisis. So it's possible that the world is going to look a lot different in the middle of August, and these might be concerns that most college presidents don't have to deal with, but it's possible that things could also look a lot worse. So my hunch is that they're trying to get through the end of the semester. We're all talking about another week or two. My concern, if I were a college president, is what this is going to mean for graduation.
Correct.
Because those are going to be, you can imagine the footage. There are a ton of people, alums, donors, parents coming to campuses across the country. And so they're going to get more attention than they would ordinarily get, even if they don't have to navigate it throughout, the classroom or the typical semester.
Will we see any colleges cancel their graduation and go 2020 COVID style because of both growing sentiment of disruption on campus and the potential of, literally, in the case we saw overnight, violence and police exchange?
I don't know if we're going to see cancellations, but I would not be surprised if we see more schools, especially those who have been in the hot seat lately or have been navigating these very difficult times, like USC, beginning to just sort of cut programming altogether. So at first it was that the valedictorian was not going to give a speech. Now they're not having their celebrity guest speakers speak. And so places where there seems to have been a lot of attention, a lot of disorder, are probably going to be limiting those ceremonies. That said, it's the hallmark of your college experience. I think, except in the face of a global pandemic where it's literally dangerous to be sitting next to another human being, it's unlikely that they're going to cancel. The other thing that I would note is, I mean, I just see in my own social media feed, because I'm Facebook friends with, a million people who are on college campuses, that most of the other schools across the country are announcing their graduation speakers and are publicizing their events. It's a handful that have been getting a ton of publicity and press where a lot of these incidents are happening. That at this point, still, those don't generalize across the board.
Okay, let's go down to Washington, D.C. Yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, President Biden, all these days kind of run into each other, officially signed the funding legislation for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And that nearly $100 billion in aid, some of it military, some of it non-military for these countries. How is that going to affect sort of the world play? What are we going to see over the next few months? Are we going to see a much more vibrant, aggressive Ukrainian military? Are we going to see this money going to Israel impacting a ceasefire, or will it in fact fuel further military actions by Israel?
I think there's a distinction between what the aid to Ukraine will do and what the aid to Israel will likely do. On the Ukrainian side of things, it allows Zelensky to fight another day or another week or another month and to at least push back against the gains that the Russians have been making. Putin hasn't won any hugely significant territories lately, but he has captured additional Ukrainian territory. And so this, I think, will allow Zelensky and the Ukrainian army to fight back and to push back. And it also sends a message to the rest of the world that's very, very important, which is even when the United States is divided, and even when Democrats and Republicans can't agree, at the end of the day, democracy and some sort of global order wins. And the Democrats were willing to help the Republicans get this bill over the line, even if it meant saving Mike Johnson. And that's a decision they were willing to take. And when nations like Russia and China or North Korea see that, they're, I think, chastened a little bit in terms of their hopes that the United States is coming apart at the seams, and that's ultimately going to be helpful, to these other countries. As far as Israel is concerned, I don't know. It's unclear. The release of the footage yesterday or the day before of a U.S.-Israeli hostage who's now still alive, I think, reinvigorates discussions about not only a ceasefire, but also hostage agreements. And I don't know if this is an opportunity now for the United States to say, look, we gave you this aid, but as a result, we need you to be far more sincere and far more proactive about working with the other side to release the hostages who are still alive and to figure out what the future looks like. I don't know.
We've talked a lot about, and the national narrative is about the dysfunction of Washington. But just in the last few weeks, you've seen debt ceiling legislation pass, you've seen aid to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and you've seen TikTok legislation move forward in a significant way. Is as ugly as it all is, and as disturbing as it all is, isn't Congress kind of working in a bipartisan fashion, at least on these bigger issues?
So, I mean, the outcomes are bipartisan, but only one side is playing the game. The Democrats have decided, and I think it's a smart decision given that we're heading into a presidential election and party control of both the House and the Senate are genuinely up for grabs. The Democrats have decided that they're going to work with the Republicans so that they can actually have some legislative accomplishments that they can bring back to their districts, that they can bring back to their states, and that Joe Biden can tout and ultimately use to win in November. I think that if they would have, opted not to cooperate with the Republicans, it's unclear who would have paid the price politically. The world would have suffered. The other thing that I would note on this front is that Marjorie Taylor Greene and her cadre of people that are trying to get rid of Mike Johnson were weakened significantly. They can put up the call. They can try to oust him. But given that Mike Johnson actually did work with the Democrats and did deliver on the promises and the compromises he said he would, to the, frankly, to the disgust of many members of the GOP conference, the Democrats have basically said, they've stopped short of explicitly saying it, but they've basically said that they will save his job. So, I mean, yes, it's bipartisanship working, but it's not a situation where members on both sides sort of come together and work out what a great deal would look like. It's a couple of Republicans realizing that they can actually do what's the right thing if they rely on Democrats, and they're going to have to give a little. But, I don't think this is a situation where everybody is thinking about what's in the best interest of the country or the world.
Is Mike Johnson the biggest winner in these past few weeks?
It hasn't hurt him. I think that he made decisions that if you would have told Kevin McCarthy he needed to make, Kevin McCarthy wouldn't have been willing to make them, because he would have thought it would have cost him his speakership, and it did, right? I think Mike Johnson has taken some risks. He figured there was a good chance he was going to get thrown out anyway. This was a Hail Mary pass, and it seems to have worked.
Last but not least, what should we be looking for over the next couple of weeks?
So Trump. I mean, I wish there were cameras in the courtroom. I wish that I was a reporter who could be in that courtroom. But over the course of the next 6 weeks or so, we're really going to get a sense of A, what Trump did and whether the evidence is sufficiently damning that he actually will be convicted. B, whether he has the discipline and the capacity to just continue to walk up to that line of violating a gag order and maybe not violate it. And C, as soon as the judge's gag order decision does come down, what the constraints look like. I mean, he's going to fine him probably $1,000 for each gag order violation, but you can imagine that the judge could also say, after you accrue 10 of these, I'm putting you in jail. So that'll be interesting. And the other thing today also to look out for is whether the Supreme Court makes a quick ruling on absolute presidential immunity. Nobody thinks that they're going to say that Donald Trump is completely immune from anything. And given that the acts that are under discussion right now were not committed entirely in his capacity as president, it's unclear that they have to make a wide sweeping ruling, but they might.
Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia. We always appreciate your insights. For everybody else, stay tuned. There's been a lot of news in the past few days. We'll have much more later today on some stories that are breaking. Stay tuned, enjoy this great weather, and we'll have updates around the clock. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.